Thank you so much. And thank you, I'd just like to say before I start off, thank you to all you guys. Seriously, it means so much to me as I'm a historian that's still learning and entering really the professional life and career. To have support from people like you guys who are more mature historians that understand things definitely way better than me, as I'm still trying to learn. I appreciate the support. So seriously, thank all of you. Now, where I'd like to begin in this presentation is with a question I had. And these kind of questions are a little, I don't know if I like them too much because there's not a good answer. But it does make you think, which is very helpful. And that is, what is it to be an American? I want you to think about that as we move through this presentation and this talk. Keep that question in the back of your mind and just think about an answer or think about potentially a way that could be a solution to that question. And so I will be talking about from Irish to American, the Irish Brigade, and really Irish America. And to understand the story of to famine to freedom, as I like to quote it as, we need to understand what it's like to be living in Ireland before the Civil War. And to understand that, we have to go really quickly to the 1400s. I know, all the way back there really quickly, just to look at, well, how did Ireland shape up in the way that would lead it to where Irish immigrant populations are moving to the United States. And this begins with the fact that potatoes were introduced to Ireland. Now, when potatoes first got to Ireland, everybody's like, okay, what are these? You know, we like corn, we like everything else. But they had some really talented botanists actually in Ireland that made a potato that was very good, very stable, very healthy, and very affordable to make. Now, this Irish potato would become a staple for the Irish community in Ireland. But, as we all know, a famine would happen. This blight would come originally from Mexico, affect potato crops there, and then move into the United States. However, it didn't have a dramatic effect as there was a more diverse kind of crop population. However, when it got to Ireland, it would be devastating. We see this in this first picture on the left. You can see a depiction of a woman bringing her child in front of a crowd, begging to have her child saved and spared. To understand this population, the average man at the time was consuming 10 pounds of potatoes per day. The average person, this was the biggest staple of their diet. And this particular... Per day? Per day. Yes. And it's definitely a crazy figure, but to understand it, you need to understand the crops at the time. If it wasn't potatoes, corn, wheat, most of those were being shipped back to the United Kingdom to be distributed in other ways. The landlords in Ireland preferred to just use potatoes as the crop for livelihood. And this would turn to bite them in the butt. When the potato blight got to Ireland in 1945 was kind of the story, or 1845, excuse me. It started to affect the crops, and obviously people started reporting it to Britain. They started saying, hey, we're having crop problems, we need support. But at this time, the Prime Minister, Peel, he was nervous. He's quoted as saying that the Irish population that they exaggerate things too much. He used that word, exaggeration. And then it rolls around the next year, you have now thousands upon thousands of people dying of starvation. And there's truly a real crisis beginning to form. And this was then, again, brought to the British government. However, at the time, to put in perspective, this was the response given when there were now confirmed reports of dead bodies. There's now confirmed reports that there is, in fact, a famine that is decimating the population of Ireland. He is quoted as saying, "The judgment of God sent the calamity to teach the Irish a lesson. That calamity must not be too much mitigated. The real evil with which we have to contend is not a physical evil of the famine, but a moral evil of the selfish, preserved, and turbulent character of the Irish people." Now, this is a quote to put in perspective how the Irish population was treated and seen as during this crisis. Now, obviously, the crisis worsens, and we're having now millions of people that are starting to freak out about their position. What are they going to do? There's no food. And at this time, landlords in Ireland did make it worse. As most of the time, they looked at their crops and they looked at the people, their tenants living on their land, and they said, well, we don't have enough money to feed you. It would be better if you actually just leave. And they would pay, actually, it got so bad, the landlords would pay to ship off their tenants to the United States because it would be cheaper to have them get removed from the land and then plant more profitable crops that could be then sold for money, and then you could buy your own food with. Now, the living conditions were so bad at this time that these people that were paid to go to the United States in immigration, they were so sickly and so on the verge of death when they get on these boats that the nickname for these boats as they landed to the United States were coffin ships. They would arrive and be filled with just dead bodies that would be dumped, and millions of people are now fleeing and thousands of them are now dying on their transportation, on their way to the United States. And in the right figure, you could again see kind of like this distraught. However, something to note is this strong sense of community that still prevailed, specifically around faith. In Catholicism tended to be the main structure for many Irish communities, but nevertheless, this problem still existed. We then get into their emigration to the United States. Now, first seen in the first picture, you can see that most Irish immigrants actually moved to the Northeast, and it happens to mainly center around the two biggest cities for them are Boston and New York. These would grow in such immense Irish immigrant populations that about 1 in 4 people living in Boston and New York were actually of Irish descent. And you could see also in the next graph, the spike, as I said, 1845 is starting when these reports are becoming more widespread. And you see as the government of Britain isn't really helping out the Irish, more people are realizing they have to leave, which is why emigration to the United States sees such a sudden spike in this instance. Now, as this immigrant population is moving to the United States, they do what any immigrant population does when they move to a different country, and that is form communities together. And when they moved to Boston and New York, they would form these tight-knit communities and bring along with them their culture. However, coming to the United States, they were hoping that, well, these are people that used to be colonies. These should be people that should be supportive. That's kind of an ignorant look that most of them had. They didn't realize the difference in faith is still as prevalent in Ireland and Britain as it is in the United States. So when they came over, they were stereotyped and their culture was put against them. We can see this, for example, in the picture on the left, which is supposed to depict the average Irish American as violent, drunk, lazy, always complaining, always, threatening. They were seen as a threat, and they were told so. They were told, the Irish immigrant population, they were told, yes, you are white. However, you have to earn it. And that is a big thing that I think the population of Irish immigrants took to them, was that they needed this idea that they had to really earn their part in America. And a further explanation, this is a very common sign that's ironically put in many Irish pubs, but it was a common sign used in many places that were looking for people to work at. They had just put, Irish need not apply. You don't have to even bother, we're not going to accept you. We're looking for work, just not Irish people. And so obviously this type of stereotyping, this type of language, you'd think they would make this population not like the United States. I mean, it kind of makes sense. They come over here, they're treated hostile. But you need to consider and understand the fact that they hated the British so much more than really anything, that when they came over to the United States, they still saw it as an opportunity. And this is where this idea, you have to work for it. They felt like they had to prove themselves as Americans. And then this is my therefore, this is why I say that the Irish Brigade did the most and strive for the most to push Irish immigrants on a better social status and becoming accepted. The Irish Brigade helped do that. Now understand, well, how did the Irish Brigade form? We need to look back at why it would. Why would there be a brigade composed of regiments of just Irish people? It seems counterintuitive, especially when the war began. There was talks of that this is a war for preserving the Union. It wasn't talked about as slavery as much. It was only preserving the Union that was really pushed. And obviously, the Irish population were like, well, this is perfect. I want to prove that I'm American. There are people now that are being born that are Irish American. They consider themselves more American. They wanted to prove themselves to this, so they felt they should have a place in the Army of the United States. However, some tight-knit communities had problems with this. This comes with their Catholic religion. It is a mortal sin to commit the act of murder or killing. Now, a mortal sin in Catholic belief, for those who are not aware, it is the idea that if you commit this sin, you must seek repentance from it. It's not enough alone just to trust the salvation. You must receive repentance. So you must receive the holy sacraments that are provided for by the Catholic Church. If not, well, you can't commit that act, or else you'll be damned. So these strong Catholic communities were asking for their own regiments where they could have their own chaplains. Their chaplains will then be able, as they are Catholic, they would be able to give these apostolic rites and sacraments to their men before they go into battle. Now, though they really wanted this, why would the United States government see this as a good solution? Especially if they want to foster this idea of a union. Why would they give a certain ethnic group their own regiment? That seems counterintuitive. Well, you also need to consider the political movements at the time. We need to think again to the Irish biggest competitor, Britain, and that is that they did not like the British, and the United States at the time was fearful that the British might get involved in this U.S. Civil War. This comes from the idea that Britain really liked many of the cash crops coming out of what would become the Confederate States, and they really wanted the trade to keep going. However, documents show that they never really wanted to go into war with the United States just because it would be so costly and it would be a problem. However, there were sympathies for the Confederate side coming from Britain. Now, obviously, the United States did not like this. They, using the Anaconda Plan that is in the left image, they encircled the South and made sure that a blockade was running, so there was no supplies or trade going in and out. But still, the fear was there. The fear that Britain might get involved. So what's a better way than to show that you would be counter British interest of going against than supporting the biggest thorn in the British side at the time, which is Ireland. So to show this support, Lincoln thought it would be a great idea if to have these sectioned regiments created to show, well, Britain, if you get involved, we're going to support Ireland. And at this time in Ireland, there's more revolts, more movements that are anti-British. It was a concern. So eventually the British decided not to, but people on the British side especially had sympathies and were very much concerned. This leads to a very prominent figure in the Irish Brigade, Thomas Marr. Now, Thomas Marr, pictured on the left, he should have his own movie. His story is just funny, and I think it's crazy. But to really show you how this guy is, at a young age, by the way, very rich family. He comes from a very rich family in Ireland, very well off. He could have just coasted and been fine. But no, he had this really strong national Irish sense to him, so he had to cause trouble, especially from a young age. He was in band practice. This is a story, allegedly, about him, that he was in band practice in his academy, and they were performing songs to commemorate the Battle of Waterloo. And he was quoted as saying that I would never commemorate any battle of a British victory. And so he's causing trouble when he's young, and he eventually still graduates, and he has some legal status, but he decides to form and become a founding member of the Young Irish Movement, or the Young Irish Rebellion, as it's called. And you can see with the Young Irish Rebellion that there was, they were put down with force by British police, and eventually he was captured. He was sentenced for treason, and he was going to be hung, but due to the politics at the time, and he was a very well-liked figure, they decided to commute his sentence to Transylvania. So he, so he ends up in right here at the very corner. Transylvania. Tasmania. I'm sorry.
Vampires.
It's vampires, right? No. Tasmania. So he ends up in Tasmania, obviously continents away, and he at first he makes a pledge and he says, "I swear I won't try to leave. I won't leave." And with that pledge, he got certain liberties. So he got to be able to roam around a little bit. He wasn't under house arrest. He just couldn't leave. But he doesn't like that. He wants to leave. He wants to get out of there after like a couple of years. And he decides, okay, I'm going to go to where Irish communities need me. And apparently they need me in the United States. So he wants to go to the United States. But like I said, he made a promise. So he decides that he will write the governor of Tasmania and say, okay, I'm going to escape, but I just want to let you know beforehand. So he sent a letter to the governor saying, hey, watch out, I'm going to be leaving pretty soon. You might want to get me. Obviously, the governor's like, what? Sends people out to go try to search for him and get him, and he leads them through a wild goose chase through the desert in Tasmania, and eventually eludes capture and gets on a ship for the United States. Now, when he gets to the United States, he begins to really enrich himself in these Irish communities there and believes himself kind of to be an Irish American now. And with that, you have communities. This is the St. Patrick's Church in New York. There was a version before that would burn down, but eventually you get the idea. Cathedrals, these community around religion, he is central to that. Now he is all for this idea of making regiments formed of Irish only. And so, as I said again, with the politics of the time, it was a perfect move. So they decided, all right, let's make these Irish regiments. Now, he would become the brigadier general for them, and he would take charge and with these men, with the regiments, sorry, these are some of the officers in a photo taken later on. But he would lead them through many battles at the start of the Civil War, starting with the First Battle of Bull Run. And he would lead his men in a way that was almost sacrificial. They would take large casualty amounts in many of these early battles, but they were commended for their strength, their sacrifice, and their fighting prowess they were given. But in some battles, like Antietam, for example, they were a key player in the Bloody Lane, and they were going against a well-defended Confederate position, but they end up still suffering upwards of 60% casualties. Now, yes, this does speak to their bravery, but these are now a lot of this brigade dying. Again, it's with with battles such as Battle of Fredericksburg, and by the time of Battle of Chancellorsville, you had a brigade that was taking such high casualty amounts that they went from a figure of around 2,500, 600 estimated when the brigade first started to now around like less than 600. Now, by this time, Thomas Marr, as cool as he is, he thinks it's pointless. He keeps sending off requests for more men as they're taking such high casualties. they don't really get approved. They're told they're backtracked. So he's like, I'm out then. He sends in a resignation letter. Now, this isn't approved at first. They don't approve his resignation, but he's like, the Irish Brigade is disbanded. There's no more. There's only like a few hundred people. So they finally accept his resignation. He'll eventually go off and become the acting governor of Montana and have a mysterious death where he got pushed off a cliff into some water. So, like I said, very interesting guy. Probably should have his own movie. But that's him. Back to the Irish Brigade, though. So by this time, after Chancellorsville, he's calling it quits. And so now, well, who's going to take the position? Well, Kelly. Patrick Kelly would end up taking the position as the acting commander at the time. And he would lead his men into the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's Kelly on the left, and he will eventually lead the men into Gettysburg. Now, when they show up at Gettysburg, they are reported to have, been talking about that there are lots of gunfire, gunshots. They could see smoke. They could see the bodies. They're worried as they're starting to walk into this battle, and with it, they move in on July 2nd. They move in at the wheat field. They will be positioned at the wheat field. Kelly is in charge, but before they go into battle, the chaplain of the 88th Regiment, he decides to give them absolution, which is what we were talking about earlier. Give them their sacrament before they go into battle. So if they die, they may be able to have general absolution, go to heaven. And this has to be the most important part of my research, was reading this chaplain, Father Corby, he comes from Notre Dame. He would end up being the president of Notre Dame after the Civil War. And he gives an account on the Battle of Gettysburg. As he's performing the ceremony to this men that gather. And it's not only the regiments of the Irish Brigade, but other surrounding troops begin to listen in, begin to bow their heads. And he is, in his account, he says, "In performing this ceremony, I faced the army. My eye covered thousands of officers and men. I noticed that all Catholic and non-Catholic officers and private soldiers showed a profound respect, wishing at this fatal crisis to receive every benefit of divine grace that could be imparted through the instrumentality of the church ministry. Even Major General Hancock removed his hat and, as far as compatible with this situation, bowed in reverential devotion. The general absolution was intended for all, not only in our brigade, but for all North and South who were susceptible of it, and who were about to appear before the judge. Let us hope that many thousands of souls, purified by hardship, fasting, prayer, and blood, meet a favorable sentence in the ever more memorable battlefield of Gettysburg." Now, this account is very core to my research when understanding how this population of people that move from Ireland makes it to the United States, how they are able to then transform into Americans. Like the question I posed to you earlier, what is it to be an American? What does that mean? And I believe you start to see it here. You see in Father Corby's account how he talks about Catholic and non-Catholic. You have officers, you have privates, you have everybody. Everybody is bowing to a person as they are giving sacramental rites to people. If you're Protestant, you think this person is worshiping idolatry. You don't believe in the sacraments, yet they are all sitting there in reverence. Why? And to me, what I could only imagine those men were thinking is, I don't see you as an Irish immigrant, I see you as an American. We're all Americans right now. On that field, they take a step back from anything that was conflicting them earlier, and they just think of themselves as an American unit, which is exactly what I think this purpose of my research was putting me towards, was this change, this fight. The fact that they're willing to sacrifice as much as they did, the fact that they had such high casualty numbers and still fought, you see that change in this account by Father Corby, which is really what I loved. Now after, now on the wheat field, again, Kelly's position will be right here. He has the Irish Brigade with him on the wheat field. And they were around 600, 500 yards away from the Confederate line when they first get to Gettysburg, and that around 500, 600 yards from where Father Corby gave his absolution, the men would then engage in battle. And obviously the battle of the wheat at the wheat field is very bloody and a very back and forth kind of affair that would result in around 37% of the Irish Brigade's casualties. Now, again, this force is a force that was now less than 600, then got reinforced by 2 more Irish-dominated regiments, and then make a fuller force. They're not really enough to a brigade level. You shouldn't really call them a brigade, but at this point they had a little over 600 men. They're going into battle, and then take 37% casualty. That's a rough number. Now, after the Battle of Gettysburg, the Irish Brigade was used sparingly in a number of other battles. Eventually, Kelly himself would die near Petersburg. He would be shot in the head when leading a frontal assault. But he was so revered as such a strong commander and such a dedicated soldier that General Hancock decided to name a new fort that would be placed at Petersburg Patrick Kelly's Fort, or Fort Patrick Kelly, due to his service, his loyalty, and his sacrifice he was able to do. And obviously, this is not the end for the Irish Brigade through the 69th Regiment. The 69th would move on in World War I as they're recalled into action. And then again in World War II, where they're subsequently recalled to action, would meet with Russian forces on the Elbe River and move in together. Now, following World War II, sorry, real quick, this is World War I. Pictures of, what would the ancestor, the descendant of the Irish Brigade would be. So it's cool to see them. And then after World War II, they would become a permanent part of the United States military, or at least hopefully permanent, with their admittance into the National Guard of New York. Fighting 69th is still there, and that's kind of cool to see that a part of Civil War U.S. history is still alive, and that regiment is still alive and well. Also, following the Civil War, obviously monuments were created, the most memorable being at Antietam and here at Gettysburg. The Gettysburg Monument itself was erected around 1888, and it was specifically dedicated to Irish American soldiers in the Civil War. It wasn't just supposed to be for those regiments. And in the pictures, you can see regiments listed, and you could also see what looks like a dog there. That's a wolf. Yes, it's a wolfhound. It looks like a dog. It's a wolfhound. It's and it's supposed to represent loyalty and strength, and really supposed to be kind of this Irish representation in the brigade, along with many other things such as the Celtic Cross. But yes, the monuments, the livelihood, the legacy is preserved. And I just, I'd like to just recap real quick. As we've moved along and seen, we started from a Irish immigrant population that was facing such hardship in Ireland with the amount of people being lost. This is a population of 8 million people that would, around after the Civil War, be at 4 million. Ireland was at 4 million people. They lost 4 million to either emigration or death. And it's scary to think that the result of or the solution to the famine was actually just depopulation. It was that bad. But to see that this population that moves to the United States is looking for this respect, they feel like they need to earn it, and they do through their actions. And in this Irish Brigade, such high casualty numbers, such sacrifice, they were giving that to get this idea that they were Americans. Now, after the Civil War, after this, you see a more social status that is more accepting of the Irish population. You see their involvement in the Democratic Party, specifically in New York. And then you see many veterans or many people of subsequent generations joining public service, such as the police force was very common for Irish people. And so you see how just this war, for example, this brigade, they were able to change so many hearts and minds about who Irish people were in America, to the point where they're not thinking of themselves as Irish anymore. Even though they were born there, they're thinking of themselves as Americans. And with this, I'd like to just end on a quote by my favorite person, Father Corby, and the most interesting guy, maybe beats Thomas More. And so there are many conflicting reports on what he said as he gave his absolution, but I really like this one. It gave me the chills, like history chills right there when I read it, because of how powerful it was. And he is recorded to have said, "The Catholic Church refuses Christian burial to those who die in mortal sin. But in times of danger, especially battle, when priests cannot hear individual confessions, the Church grants general absolution to all who are truly sorry for their sins. This is such a time. You are about to engage in battle, and many of you will not survive this day. I give you absolution with the full power the Church grants me, provided you sincerely repent and promise to make your confessions when possible." He then is reported to have given in Latin the absolution and blessed the brigade, and then he finishes reportedly by saying, "God bless you. May he protect your souls and bring victory to our cause. Go into battle with courage, and may you all meet again, whether it's in safety or in heaven."